Hello, welcome to What Is This Weapon? I'm Jonathan, and this is, as I'm sure a lot of you already knew when we put this up on social media, the Lisle Carbine. Lisle Commando Carbine, to give it its full name, which is indicative of its purpose. And even if you don't know the type, you can see that it has a whacking great sound suppressor built into it. This is integral to the weapon. But this being this show and us being the Royal Armouries, it isn't just a normal Lisle Carbine, although we have one of those to compare. It's one of the prototypes. Now, I happen to have chosen this one this time because I do have a bit of self-promotion to do. I have a new book on pre-order at the moment on the, well, it's an introduction to the arms and armour of the Second World War. Now, there isn't too much personal body armour and that kind of thing in the Second World War, so it's mainly firearms, which suits me clearly very well. There are a couple of helmets in there, though, as well. This is featured along with lots of other weapons. This is not. This is exclusive to this video, so more on that in a moment. If you check out our shop, you will find a pre-order for that book if you're interested. Like the First World War book that we did a few years ago, this is the book of the exhibition, kind of. So back in 2020, remotely, I helped to finish our Firefight display in the main museum here at Leeds. And the idea of that was really, so what? Different soldiers use different weapons. Why? Often you'll come to a museum display or encounter firearms somewhere else, and they're just different weapons. You'll get some idea of their capabilities and maybe hint at what they're for, but you won't always get the context. Like each soldier in the squad has a weapon for a specific purpose. So the kind of inspiration for that, partly from Military History Visualized, very good YouTube channel. They did some infographics of squad level disposition and weapons and things, and that inspired me to take that particular focus with that. And so a lot of that content, well, a surprising amount of rewriting required for turning notes into a published book, but it's very much inspired by that exhibition. A permanent display here at the Armouries. If you can come and see it, please do. Have a look at the book if you're interested, but we will crack on and look at this rare beast here. Now, we sometimes, with these weird weapons that we often feature on this series, we sometimes struggle to pin down what the intended purpose was. We can second guess what it was. We can look at the design. We can look at other parallels. Sometimes we can look at archival records and actually confirm what the intended purpose was, what the ultimate purpose was, if any, and how successful it was, that kind of thing. Luckily, with this, it does what it says on the tin, almost literally. It says Lisle Commando Carbine on the weapon itself. The ultimate purpose you can sort of surmise from the word commando. What use do commando forces have for very heavily suppressed weapons? Well, shooting sentries is probably the most obvious. On any kind of approach, at night probably, well, not necessarily, you can take out as many of the guys that might spot you before they spot you, and they will be less likely to spot you if you're not making gunshots. Audible gunshots. Sadly, and I say that because I'm an animal lover, but the other main use is shooting dogs, who are sort of sentries in their own way, of course, guard dogs, who are likely to blow your cover very quickly. So probably the main two intended uses, and we'll come to a bit more on usage at the end. So carbine, self-explanatory, although the word carbine is surprisingly problematic when you try to define it, but this fits both typical criteria. It's short, and it is a pistol cartridge as well. And Lisle, well, that's William Godfrey Lisle, who is another one of these blokes in sheds that crops up in British engineering of all sorts, history, not just firearms, based in Kent, and he came up with some sort of suppressed 22 or 22 rifle so as not to disturb his neighbours when he went shooting small game. Seems to be the point of that. And apparently one of his neighbours was General Sir Malcolm Campbell, who thought, hang on a minute, this seems like a really good idea for sneaky beaky kind of the sort of work that was being seriously looked at the time for combined operations. So he got combined operations headquarters involved. There's a suggestion of the special operations executive getting involved on some level as well here, but it's all rather hazy, unfortunately. So by name, it's a commando weapon, may also have been used by special operations executive, and then it has this interesting post-war life as well, which we'll finish on. Now, you might be surprised that they settled on 45 ACP, but don't forget, 1940, the Thompson submachine gun had been adopted, and the likes of the commandos were looking at the 45 1911 pistol as well as a sort of optional weapon for their purposes. So there were quite a few rounds of 45 in the supply chain, and it is subsonic by default. So I believe they did look, or the first prototype was in 9mm, 9x19 Parabellum, and they quite quickly switched over to 45 ACP because you wouldn't have to worry so much about the supersonic crack. Main noise is the big bang at the muzzle, of course, but downrange, the bullet is breaking the sound barrier if it's supersonic, like 9mm is, and there's a loud crack downrange, and you can potentially tell where the shot might have come from. So, great choice for the round, but to achieve that, they had to convert, or they chose to convert, I guess, readily available and manually operated, so you don't get the loud clang of the bolt being reciprocating behind the shot. Like the well rod pistol, you keep the thing shut, contain as much of the gases as possible up here so that they expand and the pressure differential drops. What I usually mention, the comparison I usually mention is popping a balloon with a pin versus letting the air out through the end of it. That's kind of what this thing does. And a nice big volume as well, and then some secret sauce in the inside in terms of how you aid the process. But to make all of that work, what they chose to do is take the standard service short magazine Lee Enfield rifle, which was in service throughout the war. The number 4 rifle supplanted it after 1941, but this was still very common, still being made until at least 1943, if I remember rightly. So this is one of 18 prototypes. It's not the prototype. The singular prototype, as it were, would have been, well, we actually don't know what it looked like, but there was one sort of proof of concept prototype made, allegedly put together at Bapty & Co., who are still going, the movie Armourers. That very first prototype was sort of fabricated in their workshop, apparently. These 18 were put together, well, even more interestingly, I think, at the Ford Motor Company at Dagenham. And these 18 prototypes made at Ford, well, this one anyway, and we'll show you this. So this is a DP SMLE rifle, so rifle number 1 as it had been renamed by now. So this one's marked DP. Normal proof marks as well. So drill purpose. So this had been deemed not fit for firing, but to be used for drill. It's then also got sold from service marks here. So the opposed broad arrows of the Board of Ordnance. So this has been got rid from service as well as being a DP weapon. And this reflects the private origins of this thing. You know, this was not dreamt up at Station 6 or something. This was a man in a shed who came to the attention of the authorities. The authorities liked it, and it got pretty far down, well, got to the point of production, which is what this is here. So one of many reasons why we've left this on, because it's a nice little bit of pattern room history here, not to be fired. Now, we wouldn't fire it because there's only one of them that we have. I think there's the only other one that I'm aware of is in Belgium, because 6 of the 18 were sent to Belgium for testing, and there is still one there. I'm not aware of another one of these in another UK collection. Please correct me if I'm wrong, or if you know where any of the others might be. But on the other side of this, it actually says damaged baffles. Now, I have to wonder if that isn't because, and when I said secret sauce, it's not that secret really. Maxim had patented, Hiram Percy Maxim had patented the suppressor, silencer as he called it, well before this, a couple of generations before this. So this was not particularly secret or clever, but there are a series of 13 discs. I believe there'll be steel on this one. This casing is steel, and they are sort of opened up and made somewhat convoluted to help with that cooling and expanding of gases in the system. So your gases are circulating and expanding, and then moving to the next one and circulating and expanding. So those notches in the top of the baffles sort of help with that. Now, it's one approach, not a million miles away from a modern kind of monocore design where it's just a sort of convoluted 3D printed maze for the high pressure gas. Now, to support those baffles in front of the barrel, because this is a very short barrel, just over 7 inches, it's a Thompson submachine gun barrel, which makes sense. You've got the ammo from your Thompson stocks. You've got your barrels from, presumably, the spares acquired from the US for your Thompsons. Cut that down to just over 7 inches. You've then got to support the baffles. And the way that was done was with 2 rods. We can show you this not only on the patent drawing, but on some photos we have of one of these examples stripped right down so you can see the entire contents of the gun. So we'll throw that up. But on this one, you see these 2 holes. If you were to look through those holes, you might see it. There are 2 rods. And so the baffles are slid onto those rods, and they're supported such that the bullet passes through the hole, through each baffle, in the middle of each baffle, each disc. Now, you'll notice the nuts on the end are missing, meaning that the rods are at whatever angle, meaning that the baffles are not aligned with the bore of the barrel back here. So I dare say, I don't want to impugn any of my predecessors, but I think somebody might have testified this without those rods aligned. Or that's coincidence and they were removed later because of the problem that they had. Baffle strikes are a problem if you don't precisely align your baffles. So that's why it says not to be fired, damaged baffles. And we can't show you too much of the interior of this. We might try and get a bore scope down there to show you some of it, but it's much better seen in the photos that are on our website and the patent drawing, because nothing significant changed. The only real difference, so we'll start comparing these, in here, and we can show you the inside of this, there are 3 just flat discs before you then get the slightly convoluted baffles in front. This has them all in the same opened up configuration. That's one difference. I think you can see, if I could just shut up and let you look at them, you'll see that a lot of the differences, but I can walk you through some. So this is a steel tube. I believe the baffles will be steel as well. On the production guns, they went for aluminium. And the baffles inside are duralumin, which is an alloy of aluminium of a type used in aircraft construction. So nice and strong, but light. And the difference between the two, I'll get you a precise weight of each of these. But subjectively, this is way heavier. So our prototype, unsurprisingly, is heftier. So one of the major changes is to lighten it up. It's quite nicely balanced. Shoulders points quite nicely. One of the obvious changes is we don't have this, what looks like barrel sticking out of the front here. It's not barrel, the barrel is back here. This is more of a support and a reinforcement, I guess. And on the production gun, it's truncated, it doesn't stick out the front. On the prototypes, it sticks out quite a bit. That brings us to the sighting arrangements, and you can see those changed quite a bit. Very small hoop type sight protectors and a ramp on the prototypes, and then this much simpler aluminium channel with a very pronounced tall blade within at the front. The rear sight, when I first looked at this, I thought perhaps it was a Winchester or similar buckhorn pattern rear sight. It's not. It's been fabricated, I believe, from scratch. So it's not a true buckhorn, but it's that style of sliding adjustment. So as I pull back we've got one click, and that's raised up this is a spring piece, this is a flat spring essentially, and it gets pushed up 1 notch each time you pull back this support here. Quite simple, fairly effective sighting really for a closer range weapon like this. Maximum effective range about 200 yards for this thing. That's the figure that's given in the archive records that do survive for this, and not too much of it. Whereas the rear sight on our production carbine is, as some of you might know or might have spotted, a Lanchester submachine gun rear sight, which makes sense because this is in theory Ford Motor Company, Dagenham. This is the Sterling Engineering Works, also Dagenham. Not so many years to become famous for George Patchett's design as the Sterling submachine gun, which is a descendant of the Lanchester. The Sten is the sort of interloper in the middle of that story. So a much better set of sights. However, still a little bit of a chin weld going on here. Not too bad, but you can't get fully down on the stock like you could if it was the standard 303 SMLE. I'm a little surprised that the prototype, especially with even taller sights, doesn't have some sort of a cheek piece. So before we move to the action, because there are some changes here, we should notice these features here. Something has been attached, looks like silver solder, something squarish, and something round has been attached to the bottom of the suppressor tube. Presumably, this is an attachment point for the handguard, because it's in roughly the same place as the production handguard, and there's a similar handguard depicted in the patent. So very likely this had a wooden handguard here, and then up here this squarish patch, very likely for sling swivel. So it's not that this was so prototypey that it was missing features. Those features have been lost, unfortunately. Moving back here, the SMLE bolt is still here, but it has been shortened. Now that's because the Thompson barrel comes back into the action here, to this point here. So this is residual from the charger guide that's been removed, and actually they've filled this with a piece of, they've riveted a piece of steel on and dressed it back. So they removed the charger bridge that would have lived over here because it's feeding from a detachable magazine, doesn't need the charger bridge. And this cutout for the thumb here is partly filled now with the breech of the Thompson barrel, resulting in a shortened bolt. They've also recessed the face of the bolt to accommodate the case head. And inside we have, outside, attached to the outside, we have this change to the ejector. So this protrudes into the body, rides over the face of the bolt, and between the extractor here and the ejector there, kicks out your case. So analogous to what's been going on with the 303, but it's been adapted for the 45. I mentioned the other change already, which is the magazine. So this is actually a Colt 1911 magazine that's been adapted with a rib on the back with a notch cut in it so that the existing SMLE magazine catch can be used. On the SMLE rifle and the Lee Enfield series in general, this magazine, or the magazine rather, is only removed with this catch for cleaning purposes. On this, it's a primary system of feeding, so the only system of feeding really. You could single load it, I suppose. So you have to reach in here, probably with your right hand, and pull, and the magazine will come out fairly readily. It's not exactly drop free, but so the magazines have to be modified as well. And we have this sheet metal blanking plate and partial magazine housing on the prototype. So blanking off the big open 303 magazine well and creating a new 45 caliber size magazine well. That's different on the production guns. You still have a blanking plate, but then you have this much longer full length housing for the magazine on the bottom. Other than that, not a great deal has changed. They've pretty much nailed it at the prototype stage, and this thing is getting developed very quickly. So I'd say, based on the similarities between this with its handguard, if it was on there, and the patent drawing, they're both kind of early to mid 1943, around the same sort of time frame. The production order isn't made until July 1944, so nearly a full year later on. So there's some heel dragging going on there. 600 carbines are ordered, and we find that by December 1945, only 106 have actually been delivered. And it's not really clear why that process has been so slow. 600 would be plenty for the purposes that not every commando or SOE operative would need one of these. It's not clear why only 106 were made. You're going to want to know about effectiveness. Well, I'd say similar between our star here and the production gun. There's the apocryphal story of shooting pigeons on rooftops in London and no one noticed, which is probably based on a probably true story from Lisle himself, who apparently was shooting at chimneys, or at least once may have shot at a chimney to see if anyone down below noticed. Now that's probably based on a story that's probably true, that Ian Skennerton relates, where Lisle himself said that imperceptible shots were made at a chimney in Piccadilly, where of course there are lots of pigeons. So stories grow legs very quickly. I think it's quite likely that they pivoted quickly from little puffs of brick dust on a chimney to actually shooting at pigeons, but who knows. It was of course trialled and was successful. That's why 600 were ordered in the first place. The decibel figures don't really relate to those we might measure today. It's very hard to translate them straight across, but it was compared directly with a Sten and a Mark IIs suppressed Sten, and it was 40 decibels quieter than the unsuppressed Sten and 4 decibels quieter than the suppressed Sten, which doesn't sound like a lot, but this is a logarithmic scale, and 4 decibels is perceptible. So it was quieter than a suppressed Sten, no doubt because the bolt wasn't slamming back and forth. We do have another historical, subjective account of its quietness, and this is from Malaya. Observations on the Lisle Carbine and its probable use in Malaya, so a War Office document in the UK National Archives. During a talk given in the open to a number of visiting officers at the FARELF, that's Far East Land Forces, training centre, a Lisle Carbine fired 5 rounds within 50 yards of the audience without any member of the audience realising that a rifle had been fired. So not very scientific, but illustrative that outdoors with a bit of ambient noise going on, you're not even going to know that this thing's been fired. And that's within 50 yards. While we're at subjective anecdotal reports, I fired a very close reproduction of one of these long time ago now, out on an outdoor range, and I would say it sounded like an air rifle, a sub 12 foot-pound in British terms air rifle. So really very quiet for something that is still perfectly lethal. That brings me back to one significant change, actually. So the basic suppressor design is the same, but this thing adds ports to the Thompson barrel to make it truly integrally suppressed, if you like. Barrel into the suppressor and ports for the high pressure gas to vent straight into the suppressor. Not done to bring down the velocity, as in the MP5 SD, because this thing's already subsonic, but rather just to give it that extra edge or to make the suppressor that much more efficient, is my assumption there. I haven't seen anything firm written about the choice, but this doesn't have the ports, this does. Now, usage-wise, it's pretty opaque. There's very little written down about the use this may or may not have had, bearing in mind there are only just over 100, and that was by December 45, so not tremendously prolific or accessible during the war. Allegedly, it saw use by the commandos, some people say SOE as well, in France in the preparation for D-Day. I have no information on that, can't confirm it with primary sources, but it is alleged. The only accounts of this thing being used in anger are all in one magazine article from the magazine Gung Ho. So if you haven't heard of it, this was a spin-off of Soldier of Fortune magazine, which gives you an idea of the level of credibility. It may be true, but there's almost no way to verify it. So we have a couple of people claiming, one maybe referencing the other, extensive use in Burma by the British. So Mitch Werbel, who's a famous suppressor designer later on, but he was in OSS. The Office of Strategic Services, so the US parallel to SOE. And he remembered the use of British Lisle carbines in Burma, and he stated, "We worked a couple against sentries before raids, and they were something else, better than the stuff we were issued. Both our people and the British used them in Indochina. Merrill's boys used them to terrorize and scare the shit out of the Japanese at night and in ambush." He actually went on to make in Vietnam, or in the Vietnam era, the destroyer carbine, which is very much the same kind of concept. So he was clearly taken with this thing. So quite limited evidence for the British side, but we have a bit more on the American usage. So Michael Burke, not that Michael Burke, who's OSS Jedburgh team, or team leader, I should say, and Alan Norse both claimed that they were used against Nazi officers. So for targeted assassinations, not so much for the purposes that I explained earlier, which is interesting. Does make sense. It'd make an excellent assassination weapon. There are even claims that these things, this version of course, were still around in the Troubles and may have seen some use there. I have absolutely no evidence to back that one up though. So the most evidence that we have, and certainly on the photographic side, and quite a lot of text as well, is actually from the British involvement in the Malayan emergency in the early 50s. So there's a nice account here from a British officer, Royal Highland Fusiliers, and he describes the thing, and he goes on to say, "It was the first time I've ever seen a silent weapon fired, and it was rather uncanny as there was no bang whatsoever. Just the click of the released firing pin, the whiz of the bullet, brackets not heard normally, and the thump as the bullet hits the stop bank, or body, brackets. In the jungle, most of the noises would be smothered and would pass unnoticed if not heard." Now, as is very common with accounts of suppressed weapons, he's overdoing it somewhat. At the very least, this thing's going to sound like a clap. I think he's overdoing it a little bit, but certainly the impact of a heavy bullet like 45 on something downrange is going to be more noticeable depending on what it is. Now, a number of the 106 were supplied to planters in Malaya, so guys running plantations to defend against guerrilla attack. So a mixture of weapons were supplied. Only some of them had these silenced carbines, but there's a famous photo in a bar of a guy with one slung on his back enjoying a drink. So I guess you could have done that job with almost any firearm, but it being quiet was clearly thought to be an advantage there. So we know more about this thing from Malaya than we do from the Second World War. So that's the prototype Delisle. I hope you've found that interesting. Do check out my book, Introduction to the Arms and Armour of the Second World War, for a bit on the Delisle and a lot more on a lot of other weapons. And if you'd like to learn more about the Delisle, we have, as we nearly always do, sources down in the description for you to check out. Thanks for watching, everyone. Remember, as always, the YouTube things, liking, subscribing, all that stuff. Now, you also might want to be aware of a new publication written by yours truly. It's a follow-up to our First World War introduction book from a few years ago. We've got around to doing the Second World War now. Hopefully of interest to you guys. We actually have 3 different bundles, apparently, I'm told, by our shop colleagues that you might want to check out, other than just the book on its own. So please look out for that. That is, I think, at the printers as we speak. Pre-orders are being taken now. At the time of recording, the first 100 will be, well, the first 100 will be signed, no matter what happens. But if you get in there really quickly, you might snag one of those. We also, this summer, have our new blockbuster exhibition, Gladiators. Keep an eye out for the pre-orders for the tickets for that on the website. And you'll see it on social media as well. But whatever you do, join us here again on What's This Weapon next week.